Welcome back to the Silver Bullets podcast, everybody. I am Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnick.
Chip, this week the Buckeyes traveled to Evanston, Illinois for a Friday night game, which you and I have both made our feelings about pretty well known. And, as will happen, the jocks stuffed the nerds into their lockers.
They not only stuffed them, I think that they locked the lockers and barricaded them, and I mean it's going to be a long time till the nerds find a way out of there.
Now, before we get into the breakdown of this game, I mean maybe it's just me, but have you ever seen Pat Fitzgerald look so dejected during a game?
No, I have not, and that spoke volumes. That had to just not only be it was killing him, but that kind of a thing was completely evident to his team on the sidelines. I mean, that they basically, their leader knew that they were just being thoroughly dominated. So that had to play a part in what we saw as the eventual outcome.
Yeah, I mean, the weird thing to me is he almost had a look on his face like, I'm going to get fired after this. Like,
I don't know about. Yeah,
I mean, that's the kind of the feeling. It was such a look of just utter despair. It wasn't like you would normally see on the sideline. Even when a team's getting blown out, you don't normally see a coach with that kind of expression, just this sort of dead man walking thing going on.
Yeah, what I was going to say is I don't know if he necessarily a fear for his job, but just kind of just an absolute sense of dejection. Because how is it, I know we'll get into it in greater detail, but how is it that you could continually have play after play where the Northwestern their quarterbacks would hit the wide receivers right in the hands, and I mean balls being dropped or balls sailing. I mean, it just looked like they had never thought of throwing the football in Evanston until Friday night.
Yeah, and the stats really kind of spoke to that. We talked about how we didn't think Northwestern's offense was very good. I did kind of give them credit for maybe being able to make a play off a turnover or something. My prediction was that they would score 13. You had 10, so we both had them scoring double-digit points. But that never really seemed to be an issue. Although early on, the Wildcats were able to run the football a little bit, which was surprising to me. I did not think that offensive line would be able to get push. I didn't think that those running backs would be able to break tackles or carry guys forward. I just didn't see that happening, and so it was. I think maybe the one thing that the defense and the coaching staff can take into this week as they prepare for Wisconsin is that, hey, look, they came out right off the bat and they were able to run the football against us right down our throats, and that's not something we want to see.
No, if there's anything that will prevent the Ohio State players from getting too cocky and too comfortable, like you said, Northwestern, they were able to run the ball effectively, and that's when you're going into a game with an opponent such as Wisconsin, that certainly has to be something that has to catch your attention.
Yeah, I mean, no disrespect to Isaiah Bowser and Drake Anderson, but they are not Jonathan Taylor.
No, they're not. I mean, if anything, just their combined efforts would make up for potentially one of Jonathan Taylor's halves of a game, let alone the complete total. So, yeah, it certainly is something that I'm sure the defensive coaching staff is paying close attention to. Well, how was that working for Northwestern? How are we going to fix it against Wisconsin?
Mm-hmm. And similarly, that Northwestern offensive line is not Wisconsin's offensive line. So some good things to work on when you beat a team on the road by 49 points that just made their conference championship game last year. It can elevate your maybe feeling of self-worth a little bit. So maybe this is a good thing that the Buckeyes have some things they can work on. They can point to the fact that there was only one sack in the game for the Buckeyes. They can look at some of the offensive line play in the run game and in the pass protection. So there are some things that they can point to and say, look, you're not good enough yet to start thinking you're anything special. And let's get ready, because the Badgers are going to be out for blood after a surprising result that we will also talk about a little bit later in the show.
Yeah, I think Northwestern. I mean, it was amazing to me sitting there late into Friday night because I went to the local high school game. It kind of is my little form of personal protest against the whole Friday night thing. So I DVR'd it, and by the time, for what it's worth, by the time the Avon Lake High School game where I live was done, by the time I came home, I only missed the first few moments of the game. But it was certainly, I was able to, by the time halftime came around, I was caught up to live speed. But what I was going to say about Northwestern is it was, as I was sitting there, it was very difficult for me to compare the Northwestern team that I saw playing against Ohio State versus the Northwestern team that all Ohio State fans saw 6 months ago. Mm-hmm. It just seemed like a completely different unit altogether. And that's kind of, it kind of speaks to the importance of developing your reserves, which Ohio State does a pretty good job of. Northwestern, being without a capable backup quarterback after the departure of Clayton Thorson. I understand that Isaiah Bowser suffered some injuries, so that was the Ohio State game was one of the first appearances back after injury. But yeah, it was, just a completely different team from what we saw in Indianapolis in December.
Yeah, absolutely. And the team went in, Ohio State went in with a couple of nicks in this one. Thayer Munford did not start the game. He did come in for a few plays, but so Nicholas Petit-Frere was starting, and then also you lost your pick to click on defense because Baron Browning didn't make the trip. So that's a tough break for you, Chip.
I understand. I really don't. Put it this way, I'll certainly take the loss on that. Like our friendly game that we have, and I'll take the 49-point win over Northwestern, plus the fact that Baron Browning seems to be on target to be able to play against Wisconsin. So I'll certainly take that. Both of those things in comparison to our little game here.
Mm-hmm. Now, you and I think we split our prediction because we had you were closer to Northwestern's final score of 3 points because you predicted 10, I predicted 13, and I was closer to Ohio State's point total because I predicted 45 and you predicted 42, and it was actually 52. So I think that one's a toss-up. I think we cancel each other out on that one.
I agree with you, and I think you would agree with this. And based on, I know we're going to get into talking about the game, it could have been worse. Ohio State truly, if they wanted more points, they could have had more points. They truly, at the end, when you start looking at some of the plays that were finishing up the fourth quarter, if Ohio State really wanted to completely just annihilate Northwestern even more so than they had, it was within their capacity to do so.
Yeah, and I thought that even fairly early in this game, Ohio State played pretty vanilla offensively in terms of there were really no design quarterback runs or anything like that. So, it was a pretty conservative approach offensively overall. There were some wrinkles thrown in. Some people had talked about the first touchdown pass being a new play, and I don't think it is. I think Ohio State's run that against Penn State in the past and has run it a few times in the past, but certainly it was a good time to spring that, give Wisconsin something to think about next week. But at the same time, they didn't really show any quarterback runs, which, give me the thinking emoji face on that one. It seems to me that maybe they're, saving something for the Badgers.
I would believe that that's the case, and just kind of taking it in a different perspective is perhaps they're also thinking, why expose Justin Fields to more direct hits on design quarterback runs than necessary? If we can beat this team straight up the way that we're playing, which they certainly showed that they could, why not? Because we all know that in games such as Wisconsin and some of the other opponents that are going to be coming down the pike, they're going to probably need Justin Fields to carry the ball more than he has so far this season.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's get into the game, Chip. The Buckeyes lost the coin toss. It's becoming a little bit of a problem for Ryan Day, not being able to correctly get that coin toss situation straightened out. But the Buckeyes took the ball first and went down the field and scored. Although it wasn't easy, it was a tough start not for Justin Fields so much as his receivers. The first two passes he threw were on the hands of his receivers and dropped. And Northwestern was doing a good job against the run, especially early in the game. And Ohio State had to convert a lot of third and longs, and a lot of those were just Justin Fields making plays.
And it kind of reminded me of the beginning of the Michigan State game, with the sense that J.K. Dobbins, that's part of why I gave him, when we were talking about like the Buckeye leaves and peeves, his patience and his persistence. I sat there and I thought, okay, they're not going to be able to bottle him up for forever. So J.K. Dobbins was able to eventually get everything turned around. But I think that's going to be a common characteristic or trait of upcoming Ohio State opponents, such as Wisconsin, is they are going to make a concerted effort to do everything they can to shut down J.K. Dobbins. And it just is dependent on Ohio State being patient with the running game, because sooner or later Dobbins has the ability to break out as he showed on Friday night against Northwestern.
Mm-hmm. A couple 3rd and 7s on that drive, and it ends with Ohio State scoring on a 20-yard pass play from Fields to Chris Olave, who was wide open, a nice little fake drag route that he broke up the field, and it was wide open, and Fields made a good throw, touchdown. And by the way, Justin Fields threw that to my pick to click this week, Chris Olave. I said last week, when he was shut out against the Spartans, I just expected a big return to form for Chris Olave, and boy, did he. Yeah,
I mean, looking at his stats, you were just referencing the one touchdown. I know we'll get to it eventually here, but he wound up being Ohio State's leading receiver on the night with 5 receptions for 60 yards, so he was averaging 12 yards a catch. He had a long reception there of 20 yards, so Chris Olave certainly came ready to play on Friday night.
Sure did. 2 touchdowns for Chris, most catches, most yards, and most touchdowns. So, a nice game for Chris Olave, nice bounce back for him. And I just kind of had a feeling that was going to be the case. He's just too good a player, to have to be shut out and then not to respond. So, kudos to him for doing that. So the Buckeyes take the early 7-0 lead. The Northwestern Wildcats end up having to punt after a good gain on their first play, because Ohio State only had 10 players on defense out on the field, and it led to a 13-yard rush by Kyrick McGowan, and that gave them the first down. But then they didn't do well, because Chase Young got his first sack, or his only sack of the game. In fact, Ohio State's only sack of the game, and that was a 9-yard loss for the Wildcats. They could not convert, and Ohio State get the ball back, but Ohio State then went 3 and out with 2 J.K. Dobbins runs for 2 yards combined, and then an incomplete pass to Chris Olave, Drew Chrisman with a nice punt, and then Northwestern gets the ball back. They end up with a little bit of a drive, and they were able to run the football. Bowser had a run of 11 yards. There were a couple of short completions. Bowser had another 12-yard run in there, and Aiden Smith, the quarterback, had a 10-yard run. So there were some chunk plays there in the run game for Northwestern, and that was a little concerning, as you just did not expect that to happen. And what I noticed on the field, and I know that they were, the linebackers were kind of flowing to the ball, but overflowing and leaving these easy cutbacks behind blocks for Bowser especially. But it was, they were just maybe being a little bit over aggressive early. I don't know. I'm not really sure if they were playing their normal base defense. I know that they were certainly different people, Josh Proctor, on the field than Brendan White, and so there were some new faces, and things weren't clicking to begin with. But the drive eventually bogged down, and Northwestern was forced to kick a 33-yard field goal and make it 7-3.
Yeah, Northwestern, as we were saying just a moment ago, I think they were showing some things and you might be right. I mean, it might have been over pursuit, over aggressiveness, whatever it might be, but they were showing some things that were obviously working for them at the time. If anything that will come out during the film study, you have to believe that Greg Madison, Jeff Hafley, Al Washington, who's the Ohio State linebackers coach, they're going to be poring over that film, poring over how Northwestern was able to run effectively during those opening drives, and compare and contrast that with what Wisconsin does well to make sure that those linebackers are in better position for this coming weekend.
Mm-hmm. The Buckeyes came back with the ball at the end of the first quarter and had the ball the rest of the quarter, and ended the quarter in 3rd and 15. And Justin Fields completed a 20-yard pass to KJ Hill, so they converted. And then, Chip, we got to the second quarter, and as you know, the second quarter is when everything just clicks into place nicely for the Buckeyes.
And I don't know how that happens. I mean, in all fairness, it's the kind of thing where I can only imagine. We were talking about Pat Fitzgerald a moment ago. You have to be thinking you're on the sidelines. All right, we're playing these guys tough. We're running the ball on them. We're making them earn everything they're getting. And then all of a sudden, everything just the bottom completely falls out. And then I know we're going to get to it, but you're just completely at the end of quarter number 2. You're looking up at a massive deficit, and you have to be thinking, how was it at the end of the first quarter we were down 7-3, and now look at where we are going into the second half of this game?
It's tremendous the way that the coaching staff changes tactics and fixes things that aren't working in the first quarter. They don't wait till halftime to make adjustments, and they just go out and really start to get into a groove in the second quarter. There's been, I think, 4 of the games have been extremely close after the first quarter, and the Buckeyes have gone on to win all of them quite easily.
Yeah, it is a credit to the coaching staff that, when they talk about making halftime adjustments, you hit it right on the head. Ohio State, they don't wait for the half. They're making those adjustments during the series. When the offense is out on the field, the defense is making adjustments, and vice versa. And they're figuring out, all right, this is working, this isn't. When they do this, we need to do that. And they're making those adjustments quickly, and the results speak for themselves.
Mm-hmm. So the Buckeyes end up going down the field, 12 plays, 75 yards, and 5:21, scoring on a 19-yard pass from Fields to J.K. Dobbins, and it was really kind of catching a few passes that opened things up for Dobbins in the run game. And after that, he was pretty solid, as he normally is. Northwestern then had a pretty unsuccessful drive, 5 plays, 9 yards, and then the Buckeyes, took over the ball again, and this time they were thwarted, and this time they only took 3 plays. To go the distance, and made it 21-3. Dobbins with a big run on this one, 68 yards, and his second rush was 5 yards, and scored the touchdown. So J.K. Really, after the touchdown reception, the rest of his night was pretty easy for him.
Right, and he was my pick to click, by the way. That last,
Yes.
Even though I missed out on Baron Browning, and that was, how could you possibly have known until, the day before that? All right, he's going to miss out on the game, but. Kind of what I was saying a moment ago about how it seemed reminiscent of the Michigan State game. Same type thing for J.K. Dobbins. He started out with some challenges and some difficulty against Michigan State. It just, maybe you're right. Maybe it was that touchdown reception, because that was the first of the touchdowns that he scored. Mm-hmm. It certainly did seem to get him going and the running game going, and pretty much that was all she wrote for Northwestern.
Yeah, it really was. It was 21-3 at that point. Northwestern then had a 29-yard drive before they were stopped. And we saw Garrett Wilson get into the punt return team early in this game. He fair caught it at the end of that drive. Then the Buckeyes actually went 3 and out as Justin Fields dropped the snap from Josh Myers. It kind of derailed that. There was a brief moment on that 3rd and 11 where I thought that they were going to pick up that run with Demario McCall, but it got closed down. He got 7 yards of the 11 he needed. Then again, Northwestern with 3 plays, and they went backwards minus 6 yards, and then the Buckeyes did what the Buckeyes do, scored again. It's 28-3. This time, Chris Olave for 8 yards, and this was the play after the muffed punt snap by Northwestern gave the Buckeyes the ball at the Northwestern 15-yard line, and that's not something that you can get away with when you're already overmatched. You can't give Ohio State the ball at your 15-yard line.
No, I mean the muffed punt snap was just kind of indicative of the evening that Northwestern. I mean, once that avalanche kind of started rolling downhill, I mean, it was impossible to stop. If anything, just thinking back to Friday night, giving credit to Northwestern defensively for their performance at the beginning of the game, as you alluded to, the fact that Northwestern kept continually 3 and out. At one point you referenced 5 plays, 9 yards. I mean, and not being able to sustain drives. That defense just eventually, I think they're talented and they're well coached, but they don't have infinite depth. And I think you started to see kind of the results of being out on the field far more than they probably should be. They certainly deserve to have the offense be able to sustain drives longer than 3 to 5 plays.
Mm-hmm. So the Buckeyes, there were a couple of punts back and forth there toward the middle part of the quarter, or getting late in the second quarter. Then the Buckeyes had the ball, and they tried to run their 2-minute offense, Chip, but it didn't go very well. Ended up having to punt the ball from their 45, and this time Drew Chrisman becomes the weapon, as he has done so many times before. 54-yard punt down at the Northwestern 1, and the Buckeyes had all 3 timeouts, which you rarely see the Buckeyes have all 3 first-half timeouts this late in the half, and they used them on defense. They didn't get the safety. They came close a couple times, but they did manage to get the ball on the plus side of the field on the ensuing punt, as there was no real attempt to punt that. He was just get it out of here, get it out of the end zone, don't let it get blocked. And then Ohio State again tried the 2-minute offense. It didn't go great. Dobbins was tackled inbounds on a bit of a crossing route, and time was wasted. But they managed to run the field goal kicker out there. They got the clock stopped. Northwestern tried to ice Blake Hobbill. And I've been a little critical of Hobbill this year because he's been inconsistent, but he crushed that 55-yard field goal.
Oh, easily. I mean, I realize that 55 yards was all that was needed, but to kind of put it in a different perspective, that ball, I think he might have been good from at least 60, maybe even more. It went further. I mean, I'm not knowledgeable in terms of how much space is behind at Ryan Field with the end zone in terms of how much further goes beyond the basically like where the uprights, but he's certainly. I mean, it looked like, okay, that could have been, and that had to be such a huge psychological boost for him. As I was saying to my wife when we were watching it, that it's so rare that, and I don't want to sound cocky or arrogant, but it's so rare that Ohio State is calling on Blake Hobbill to kick a long field goal. I mean, most of the time when they want him to kick a field goal, it's within closer distance, and like you said, it's one of those things where there's a lot of skepticism as to, all right, will he be able to perform if called upon? So that had to be such a huge psychological boost for him to be able to drill a 55-yarder, last play of the half. As Gerd and Tom Orr were saying, it just seemed as though everyone was jumping up and down, kind of like this was, this was the game winner, so to speak. And in all actuality, all it was just kind of, just the icing on the cake, so to speak, for a spectacular first half.
I think I saw an estimate of somebody had posted that it would have been good from about even up to 62, 63 yards. But it was quite the kick. Of course, he went crazy. The sideline went crazy. You saw Chase Young run out on the field going nuts, and it was it was good to see because that really shows how together the team is, how much they care about each other, how much they urge each other on, and how much they're happy when their teammates do well because they understand that it's part of how they're going to be successful as a team. So it's really a great mentality this team has shown this year. And of course, we haven't seen a lot of adversity, so who knows how that will go when they are faced with some. But they end this half up 31-3, and it's not often that you get points out of a 3-play minus 2-yard drive, but that's what the Buckeyes were able to do.
Yeah, and 31-3. That pretty much, if this had been a boxing match, the official would have waved Northwestern off and called a technical. They would have said that was a standing TKO because that game was done, and Northwestern knew it. Pat Fitzgerald knew it. Yeah,
stop the fight. Northwestern had the ball 8 minutes in that quarter and got absolutely obliterated in that quarter. So that's exactly the opposite of what the Wildcats would have been expecting with having more of the ball and that kind of thing. So big lead to go into the third quarter with, and again that final drive, it started with a Thayer Munford hold, and then the pass to J.K. Dobbins inbounds kind of ruined any real chance to get any closer. And they could have done the Hail Mary, or they could have tried the field goal. And kudos to Ryan Day for saying, look, my field goal kicker's been kind of spotty. I'm going to go out there and give him a chance to be confident and make a kick. And, it could have backfired spectacularly, but Hobbiel stepped up and made that. So, good job by everybody all around. And they took the ball into the third quarter, where Northwestern got the ball first and only managed to go 19 yards. As the Buckeyes did a pretty good job, again, after that first quarter of sniffing things out, shutting things down. Northwestern ended up with a decent amount of running yards at the end of the day because they were able to move the ball some on the backups, even though they didn't score any more points. So, again, good adjustments by the defensive coaching staff. This is not something we saw last year, these adjustments in-game. It was usually stop the bleeding at halftime and hope that we can overcome whatever it is that we did in the first half.
Yeah, Northwestern, they were down 31-3. I give them a lot of credit for trying to find something to spark what was a listless offensive performance. But as you said, I think this is it's a testament to the Ohio State defensive coaches that Ryan Day brought in, because, as you said, they were able to just shut down whatever Northwestern thought they were going to attempt, and immediately kind of went right back to work getting the ball back for the offense.
And you look at this team, and you've seen Ohio State teams in the past that don't step on the opponent's throat and put the thing away, but they come out, they get a stop in the first drive of the second half, and then they go 65 yards on 7 plays and punch it in. Justin Fields throwing a nice pass to Austin Mack for the 23-yard touchdown to make it 38-3.
Yeah, like you said, in previous years, the kind of taking their foot off the throat, as you would say, they not only put their foot on the throat, but they were standing. It might have been like the entire squad was all right, I'm going to pick you up and just kind of pile drive Northwestern. There was no mercy going to be extended to Northwestern on Friday night for sure.
Now, the Wildcats managed to come back with a halfway decent drive. They went 45 yards on their next drive and came into a 4th and 11 at the Ohio State 42. And it was, not 4th and 11 is tough to pick up. Aiden Smith got flushed, and he almost picked it up. He went 9 yards, but Ohio State held and took over. And then, they did Ohio State things, but they basically ran out the quarter and moved the ball a little bit and went into the fourth quarter. They ended up having to punt on that drive, but again, Drew Chrisman was doing a nice job all night with dropping the ball into where it needed to be. I think it was his shortest punt at that point, 37 yards, but it was fair caught at the 9, so you'll take that every day of the week. Northwestern didn't do anything with it. They started sort of an exchange of punts, And then we started to see some of the backups come into the game, and we saw Chris Chuganoff get the next touchdown on a pass to Jeremy Ruckert on a play where it was kind of funny because it was you thought, oh wow, what a pick play that was, but honestly it was a Northwestern defensive back picking off his own teammate by holding the other receiver.
Yeah, at first I would thought, oh my gosh, they're going to call that one back because it's a pick play. But then when you look on the replay, like you said, Northwestern screwed up. So Ohio State and Jeremy Ruckert were the lucky beneficiaries of that mistake.
It was almost like it would have been actually kind of funny to have heard the crowd react to the flag being thrown and thinking that oh, that's coming back. And no, it's defensive holding, declined touchdown, because that should have been called, because I think it was Olave who was just absolutely getting mugged on that play.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So 45-3 at that point, and they stopped really trying to score. But I mean, even when you're not trying to score, if you have Master Teague, you might end up scoring. And he went 73 yards on the next drive to score score the touchdown and put the final score at 52-3.
And I don't think Master T got the memo that, okay, we don't need any more points, we're good. But in all fairness to Master Teague, and this is something that we were just talking about, kind of keeping their foot on the gas, or whatever kind of analogy we want to make. It's a credit to the backups when they get in there, because they know by going in there and playing hard and playing intensely, that is what is going to earn them more playing time in the eyes of the coaching staff. So, with Master Teague, and that was what was kind of interesting was, you're talking about the backups on the offensive line. In that case right there, what you're looking at is DeJuan Jones, who is a true freshman offensive lineman. The play-by-play, they made a point of pointing it out, because DeJuan Jones is a massive human being, 6'8", 300. I'm not sure in terms of how many pounds north of 320 he is. Just massive. But it just showed that after Master Teague took off for that 73-yard touchdown run, that DeJuan Jones was doing everything he could to run down to the end zone to celebrate with the rest of his teammates.
I'm not sure the three starting linebackers for Northwestern weigh as much as DeJuan Jones.
You might be right. And what's even scary to think about is, I remember in the preseason that I think Coach Day said DeJuan Jones has actually lost weight since he had been on campus, enrolling in June, how the freshmen usually do. So just imagine how much. I mean, he's certainly not going to shrink in terms of height, but just imagine with a full winter off-season conditioning with Coach Marotti, how much more dominant he could become, because you can't coach that kind of size. And you and I both remember a certain guy that stood 6'8" and how dominant he was. I'm not saying he's the same player, but I'm just saying you can't coach size. So I'm sure that Ohio State is very, very excited for the potential of DeJuan Jones playing on that offensive line in 2020 and beyond.
Well, if DeJuan Jones could get as many breakfast food items as Orlando Pace, that would be a sight to see. But I will say, for a big man, running down the field behind Teague celebrating that long run, he moved pretty good. He was a solid basketball player. And a lot of people forget that that was his first love, and he was one of those guys that I think he had some basketball scholarship offers, but somehow somebody was able to kind of get in his ear and say, you could probably play at a bigger school if you concentrated on football. But from what I've seen online from the players, and I think I've seen some Twitter videos from the summertime, I think he was pretty impressive on the basketball court. Yeah. So anyway, that was that was it for the scoring. They, like you said, they could have scored more. Marcus Crowley had a 53-yard run on the last drive of the game before they took victory formation. But it was a good night for the Buckeyes in Evanston. I mean, if you have to play on a Friday, you may as well win by 49 points.
Yeah, if you have to play on a Friday, and you and I are both of the same mindset, and personally, I'm hoping that this is a very, very infrequent, I should say, occurrence. Before we started recording, I was seeing stuff on Twitter that this was a highly rated telecast. It should not be a surprise to the people at Big Ten Network that, hey, newsflash, Ohio State fans are very devoted to their team. So that shouldn't be a surprise, but I certainly hope that the people at Big Ten Network and within the Big Ten Conference don't make this a habit of your year with Ohio State or any of the other big schools. I mean, I just think Friday night needs to be reserved for high school football.
Mm-hmm. So let's, one of the things I have to say is that, that we talked about the 73-yard run by Master Teague. It is so, Tony Gerdeman calls him a closer, and he's right. It's so unfair for a team, especially a traditionally undersized team like Northwestern, to be beaten down all night by that offensive line at J.K. Dobbins, and then in the fourth quarter, when you're exhausted and just barely can keep your head on straight, you've got Master Teague coming at you fresh.
Yeah, and you alluded to him being the closer. If Master Teague is the closer, and I'm not disputing that, what does that make Marcus Crowley? Because you're talking, I'm being completely serious.
No, I know.
mean, Marcus Crowley was the player of the year in Florida last year, high school player of the year, and he came in, and I was joking about how Master Teague didn't get the memo that we didn't need any more points. That's kind of what I was alluding to, that it could have been worse. Mm-hmm. Marcus Crowley, he had a 53-yard run, and the next thing you know, they're in victory formation. If they wanted to, they could have scored again. So I just don't. It's I don't want to say that it's unfair, but it's the kind of thing where you truly do feel. I truly feel sympathy for the opposition when Ohio State, the backups, are able to come in and be as almost as equally dominant as the starters.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Chugs only threw 2 passes, so it's not like they were really actively trying to score after Justin Fields left the game. So, but we alluded to your pick to click was J.K. Dobbins, 18 carries, 121 yards, 1 touchdown. He also caught a touchdown pass, 68-yard run to keep his. I mean, he's just been busting out big runs all year after not being able to do it at all last year. So it's so phenomenal to see Dobbins absolutely return to that. Not only return to his freshman form, but also building on that with his strength and his not wanting to go down, finishing runs hard, and doing all those things that we didn't see from him last year.
Yeah, his patience. They spoke about it during the telecast that last year he was splitting the position with Mike Weber, and if Ohio State coaches wanted to, they could try to make this into. We were just talking about Master Teague. He has to. Fight to keep Master Teague on the bench. The coaches are. I want to give them credit for the fact that they recognize that J.K. Dobbins is playing with a lot. He's certainly more patient. He's a lot more determined. That if, for example, instead of trying to break the long runs, that if it's not there, it's not there. But being patient enough to recognize that it's sooner or later it's going to happen with that offensive line, and he's certainly capitalizing on those opportunities when they present themselves.
Yeah, and all he can do is continue to, play hard, and if he plays hard, any single play that he plays hard can go to the house, and that includes when the defense has been stuffing them early, like it happened at Northwestern, it happened against Michigan State. But if you just keep with it, eventually that hole is going to be there, and they're not going to be able to catch him. I mean, really, I thought he was going to score on that 68-yarder, and the safety had a bit of an angle on him to kind of hurt him toward the sideline. And I think maybe if he sticks his foot in the ground and cuts back, he might be able to get in. But he just tried to do it with speed, and it didn't quite get done. But a great night for J.K. Good pick by you. Pick to click. Master Teague went 7 carries, 96 yards, and a touchdown. Ryan Day not giving him another carry so he can go out and get 100, but that's okay. And Marcus Crowley had 2 carries for 53 yards, even though he had 1 carry for 53 yards, which means his average is 26.5 yards per carry.
Yeah, I mean, they racked up offensively just between those players. I mean, Justin Fields, we mentioned it earlier in the podcast. Justin Fields only carried the ball 6 times for 8 yards. Demario McCall, you referenced it earlier, had 1 carry for 7 yards. But generally speaking, I mean, 279 yards as a group, average 7.5 yards a carry. The running game, this is, it to me, I always look at it, it's like I would rather establish the running game, because sooner or later there's going to be a game where the conditions are not going to be conducive to passing the ball, and sometimes you have to. It's not always necessarily the sexiest thing and the most exciting thing, but being able to run the ball when you want to, even though when the opposition knows that it's coming. To me, that's a sign of a dominant team, and that's basically how Ohio State's been winning these games.
Yeah. Northwestern ran for 157, but a bunch of that was late, in kind of garbage time, and a bunch of it was in the first quarter. So I think if you take the meat of that game in the middle, the second and third quarters, not a whole lot going on there. Isaiah Bowser finished with 65 yards, but he only averaged 4.1. That's not really something you want to see. Ohio State giving up a back, averaging 4 yards carry, but it doesn't happen often. And again, most of that was split between the first quarter of the game and sort of garbage time against some backups. Drake Anderson had 39 yards. And, Aiden Smith had some decent scrambles and decent design quarterback runs, and he ended up with 33 yards. Smith, though, 6 completions and 20 attempts, 1 interception, and he threw for 42 yards and took 1 sack. So I do give them credit in terms of, I liked what Pat Fitzgerald had them doing in terms of throwing the ball quickly, getting it out, not taking their chances with that pass rush, because Ohio State didn't get to him very often and didn't get a lot of hurries on him. They got the early sack by Chase Young, and that was the only sack of the game. And they did flush him a few times, but they weren't waiting for guys to try to get open downfield. They were trying to hit things in the 4, 5, 6 yard range and try to move the ball, kind of that way. And I think Ohio State would take that all day long, because with that offense from Northwestern, they're not going to sustain drives trying to do that.
No, I mean, math has never really been my strong point, but 6 of 20, that's what is that? It's less than completing less than a third of your passes, and for 42 yards, for an average of 2.1 yards, per play, that's not really conducive to a highly effective offense. And here's a strange thing, has nothing to do in the stats, but watching the game, and maybe you didn't see this, and maybe it was just me, but when they would show Aiden Smith sometimes. At one point, I actually froze the television to ask my wife if she agreed with me. I could have sworn that it was, Richie Cunningham of Happy Days playing quarterback for Northwestern. I said, "Do you look at that kid's face through the face mask?" So my wife agrees with me at least. But Aiden Smith, he was certainly not helped with, I don't know how many drops he had. He was not necessarily putting the ball in places for his receivers to catch it always, but I know one play in particular. I remember the leading receiver for Northwestern was Riley Lees, and there was a pass that hit him square in the hands, and he dropped it and started pounding the turf in frustration. So it was one of those kind of nights for Northwestern. I mean, I defensively, like I said, they play as solidly they possibly can, which is kind of what I expected, which kind of referenced the first quarter, the performance that they had against J.K. Dobbins in Ohio State. But sooner or later, that offense has to be able to carry its share of the load because the defense eventually just caves in and they can't do much more.
So Justin Fields, they also played, Andrew Marty played in this game for Northwestern. He threw one pass, and it was intercepted. So,
yeah.
not a great night for Andrew Marty to make an appearance. Justin Fields was 18 of 23, 5 incompletions. Like I said, the first 2 passes of the game were on target and dropped, and he had a couple throwaways, so just basically almost a perfect night for him. Only 194 yards, didn't have to throw for a lot of yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. Great night for Justin Fields. Chris Chugunov 1 of 2 for 7 yards and a touchdown. And so good night passing the ball for the Buckeyes. The Wildcats were afraid of the Ohio State speed. They were bailing. They were giving up cushion, and they just took it. They just took it. Okay, well, we need 6 yards, and you're going to give us 9 for free, so we're going to take it.
Yeah, it was the kind of thing where after a while, like you said, we referenced Pat Fitzgerald frustration and agony. I think he realized they had nothing that could stop them. There was nothing that they could do to counter it. And after a while, just do the best you can with what you got. And unfortunately, as you could see by the final score, it wasn't nearly enough.
Receiving, Chris Olave, we had talked about him, 5 catches, 60 yards, 2 touchdowns, and he was my pick to click. We both, Chip, we're really, really smart guys because we're really good at picking offensive picks to click. I mean, who would have ever thought J.K. Dobbins and Chris Olave would come up big?
I recall last week saying, I know this is going to be kind of cheating, but it was one of those. It was just that hunch that it was going to be kind of some rough sledding at the beginning of the game for J.K. Dobbins, and then I figured he would eventually be able to come through, which he did.
Austin Mack, I believe, was shut out in the first half and ended up with 4 catches for 50 yards and a touchdown. Dobbins with 3 catches, 30 yards and a touchdown. Garrett Wilson getting more involved, 3 catches, 28 yards. KJ Hill just 2 catches for 19. A quiet night for KJ. Benjamin Victor, very quiet night, 1 for 7, and Ruckert 1 for 7 as well. His was a touchdown. Receiving, you talked about Riley Lees, 3 catches, 19 yards. That's their leading receiver.
Yeah, it kind of what we were talking about. Just either the passes were completely missing the mark or they were being dropped. I mean, it was that kind of night for Northwestern on the passing side.
I do not blame them for dropping them. I know the one you were referencing with Lees, where he caught the ball or dropped the ball on a slant. He was looking to see what was ahead, and what was ahead is he was about to get a face full of a Buckeye safety.
Yeah, and there were many a time where you talk about a faceful. Aiden Smith, there were numerous times where he came up with chunks of Ryan Field turf attached. He was carrying some of that off, after not necessarily being sacked, but being hit by Ohio State defenders.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say when you mentioned him looking like Richie Cunningham. I didn't really notice his face because every time they showed him, he had a huge chunk of sod in his face mask. And I thought, well, how could there be any grass left on this field? Because every time he's hit the deck, a yard of that field has ended up in his helmet.
Yeah, it had to be very disconcerting to come up and, you just got walloped, and now you got to kind of fish all the dirt and grass out of your face to get ready for second and whatever or third and whatever.
I think between that, the repeated turf in the face mask and the muffed punt snap, I think that's just Northwestern getting its comeuppance for the long grass.
Well, I thought that both Gerd and Tom said it really wasn't so much long as much as it was slick.
Yeah, it definitely was slick. But I tell you that, they, and I don't think it's. I always think they make more of it than it really is. But they actually had a graphic that they made. The Northwestern Wildcats tweeted out a few days before the game, and it was like a tape measure in the grass, and it was reading 9. And I'm like, okay, it's not a 9-inch grass field, but if you have longer grass and there's dew or rain, it's going to hold more water, right?
Precisely.
So it's going to be slick. And it was. People were slipping and sliding all over the place, especially early in that game. So, just to finish, Northwestern's receiving, Jace James had 2 catches for 10 yards, and Kyrick McGowan 1 for 13, and that's it. 6 receptions for 42 yards. Drew Chrisman, 5 punts with a 47.4-yard average, a long of 56, and 3 chip inside the 20, no touchbacks.
Somewhere Coach Tressel is ecstatic about the performance of Drew Chrisman.
Punting is winning, and that's why he got my Buckeye leaf this week. And Javier was 1 for 1 on field goal tries from 55 yards. Not too shabby. We mentioned your Baron Browning pick to click didn't come to pass because he was banged up, didn't make the trip. I understand he should be good to go for Wisconsin, which is good. My pick to click was Jordan Fuller, 5 solo tackles, and he was Ohio State's second leading tackler behind Malik Harrison, who was everywhere.
Yeah, and that I think that's, if anything, that's kind of speaks volumes about the defensive scheme that Ohio State was, very effective with shutting down the Northwestern running game. I know that they had some success early, but like you said, Malik Harrison was everywhere, and I think that's kind of indicative of the defensive coaching staff making adjustments and putting Harrison in position to be successful.
The play that kind of stands out to me was a screen pass. Chase Young read it really well and went really high in the air to try to knock that down. And when it did come down in the hands of the receiver, Malik Harrison was there to destroy him.
Yeah, he's certainly playing his way up the NFL draft boards, that's for sure.
Yeah. And we would be remiss if we didn't give a shout out to Sevyn Banks and Amir Reep. Each of them had an interception in that game.
It was unfortunate that Sevyn Banks, that his knee was down, because he immediately could have. He was trying to make the pick six. It certainly looked like it at first glance, but the officials made the right call. He was down, and I think it was in either the next play or the subsequent plays. That's when Jeremy Ruckert had the touchdown reception.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the funny thing was too, it was a weird looking play, and he must have known his knee was down, because it almost like he hesitated before running into the end zone. Like, I'm not sure, I heard a whistle, so let me run it in. And sure enough, they showed a replay. It was pretty clear that his knee was down when he caught it. But nice to see those guys getting involved, the backups, and Tommy Togiai with a nice game as a backup. He had 4 tackles, basically coming on, in the second half and just harassing people left and right. It was a good night for pretty much just about everybody. Shaun Wade is going to get an interception. It's amazing that he doesn't have one, but he was around the ball. They usually didn't even throw to his side, but the 2 times that he did, he broke them up.
Yeah, Shaun Wade, he's due. You never know, this weekend might be his opportunity to get one, but like you said, the entire defense played extremely well.
Yeah. So 49-point victory at Evanston, and again, a 24-0 second quarter really broke that game wide open. And then just from there, it was just demoralizing, crushing, pounding it in your face with Master Teague and Marcus Crowley, and smothering you defensively with backups on the field. And not a nice night for Wildcats fans. They will have better days than this.
One could hope, but they're playing Iowa this weekend, so. It's going to be tough for Northwestern to get to bowl eligibility, in my estimation.
Yeah, I don't think there's any way they get to bowl eligibility with what they've got left. They have no margin for error remaining at all. So I would say at 1-5 on the season, it's unlikely that you're going to a bowl game this year.
Highly, and Pat Fitzgerald will just. I think there's going to be some serious soul searching about the direction of the program offensively, because his offensive coordinator has been with him, the entire time he's been there, and loyalty is a tremendous thing, but they might need a fresh approach to what they're doing up in Evanston.
Mm-hmm. So there were a lot of champions in this game. A lot of people graded out as champions, Chip. The offensive players of the game were Justin Fields and Jonah Jackson. They were obviously graded out as champions along with J.K. Dobbins, Master Teague, Luke Farrell, Jeremy Ruckert, Mitch Rossi, Chip. Did you know Mitch Rossi was on the team, Chip?
I did not know Mitch Rossi was on the team, but I know that Mitch Rossi was on the field when Master Teague scored that touchdown. I did know that because on the replay I saw that's when Mitch Rossi was in the game.
Chris Olave, KJ Hill, Garrett Wilson, Wyatt Davis, Josh Myers, and Brandon Bowen are the rest of your champions. Defensively, the player of the game, Malik Harrison, no surprise there. Although I think it's fair to say Jordan Fuller clicked. So my pick to click worked.
Yes.
The other defensive champions, Chase Young, Davon Hamilton, they still have been champions for every game so far. Jonathan Cooper, Tommy Togiai, Antoine Jackson, Brendan White, Damon Arnett, Jeff Okudah, Seven Banks, Jordan Fuller, and Amir Reap. Then the special teams player of the game was Blake Hobbiel. So he was, rewarded for that 55-yarder. And then you can also count Chris Booker, Brandon Paul, Zaid Hamden, and Tommy Eichenberg, scout team players of the week.
Yeah, the players that you listed. I mean, like you said, I mean it's one of these things where some of the champions are very obvious. One of the players that you referenced that I want to give special attention to was Jonah Jackson being named a champion. Considering the fact that he came in from Rutgers, I saw something on social media that said congratulations to Jackson because Ohio State being at 7-0, that equals the amount of victories that he had earned while he was playing for Rutgers in his previous season. So I'm happy that he's getting a taste of what it's like to be a part of a winning program.
Yeah, he's been very, very good for Ohio State, and I like his demeanor as an offensive lineman. He just goes at people and he attacks, and I like that. So the Buckeyes this week, Chip, will play Wisconsin at noon on that's Big Nude Saturday.
Yeah, well, you're the one. Yeah, in terms of with the pants are optional or whatever it is that you how it goes in the Citro household, but it wasn't a surprise. I mean, we were talking about it for weeks that it was going to be a noon game. What is a surprise is what preceded the build up to this game. Based on the results from last weekend, Ohio State. That was one of the fortunate things about a Friday night is that it freed college football fans such as you and I to watch other games without worrying about missing stuff that might impact Ohio State.
Yeah, I actually spent much of my day Saturday getting stuff done that needed to be done, and my wife, we went and celebrated her birthday, so I didn't actually watch the normal amount of college football, although I will admit to sitting in a bar with the one game on the TV, another game on my phone. So you could take me out of the house, but I do have to have my college football, at least something that I can glance at every few minutes and kind of check on things.
Yeah, my sons, they finished up their cross country season, so in the afternoon, that's where I was. Being able to kind of presume, okay, well, Wisconsin's going to be taking care of business, based on what the Vegas odds makers had written. Nobody would have expected kind of what the end result was, but coming home and finding out what had transpired, what I missed, it was certainly some regret. But I'm glad that I saw my sons finish up their cross country season.
Well, before we go take our lap around the Big Ten from this weekend, we would be remiss. I don't want to forget to do this because it's kind of a big deal. Jeff Okudah named a Thorpe Award semifinalist, Chip.
Yeah, and I agree with something that Gerd wrote, is that it's almost impossible to reward Okuda without acknowledging the contributions of the other members of the secondary, because they have certainly played extremely well. But yeah, congratulations to Jeffrey Okuda on being a Thorpe semifinalist.
And considering the way he's played this year, it's unlikely Chris Carter will be able to talk him into coming back for another year.
I highly doubt it.
All right, let us get into the Big Ten this weekend, and of course, Wisconsin. And this is one of the things that really shocked me, because I was, again, I had stuff I had to get done. I went and got it done. I ended up getting to watch a little bit of that game, and it was 20-7, and Illinois didn't look like they were able to do anything. And I was like, okay, so I went and finished some things and spent some time with the wife, and before we went out. And when I noticed it when we were out, and they were scrolling through scores, and I noticed that the final score was 24-23, I about fell out of my chair, Chip. It was not something that anybody could have predicted. I don't even think Lovie Smith could have predicted it, especially when it was 20-7 at that point.
No, I mean, let's face it. It was the kind of thing where the longer this game went on, that just kind of as I said, I would think that somebody would be kind of thinking, well, Wisconsin, they're gonna turn it on. They're gonna get this taken care of. I mean, Illinois is just being a pest, and Wisconsin, they must be screwing up, which they did, and they're gonna get it figured out, and they're gonna wallop Illinois the way we all expect them to. And it would be completely far-fetched to believe that Lovie Smith saw this one coming.
Yeah, I mean, granted, 20-7 is only a 2-score lead, but it was the second half of the game, and again, from what I saw, Illinois wasn't doing a whole lot with the football. In fact, right, it was 20-7, and Illinois had just given the ball back, and I said, okay, let me go check out some other things, because I think at that time there weren't very many close games on TV. It was like every game was kind of lopsided. I was like, this is kind of turning into just a blowout day. There's not really a whole lot compelling, so I felt pretty good about going and doing other things for a change. And I missed one for the ages apparently. But Wisconsin now here's the thing: Wisconsin, when they come into the Horseshoe this weekend, Ohio State's going to get maybe not only their best shot, but the best shot that they're capable of on their very best day. Because, Chip, if Wisconsin loses to Ohio State, it doesn't even matter if they beat Minnesota. Minnesota could still win the West with losing that game.
Yeah, Wisconsin, I mean, I'm always nervous about playing Wisconsin just because of the style of play that they have, but they're coming in embarrassed and angry, and they're going to give Ohio State everything that they possibly have, because at this point they know that they're pretty much playing for pride based on the upset at the hands of Illinois last weekend.
Well, they're going to want to prove that they still belong in the conversation among the top teams in the country, and they're going to want to prove it was a fluke. Like I said, it's going to be everything they can throw at Ohio State is going to get thrown at Ohio State. And I think that Ohio State normally has a defense that handles offenses like Wisconsin's pretty well, especially when Wisconsin's quarterback isn't necessarily the best. And Jack Cohn's been fine in some games, but I've seen other games where I mean that Northwestern game, he was terrible.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about Ohio State, about the patience and persistence of J.K. Dobbins and the Ohio State offensive coaching staff with the running game. That pretty much is the Wisconsin attack in its entirety. And what I mean by that is, you and I both know, and I think our listeners know, Wisconsin, they pride themselves on having a mammoth offensive line and a dependable running back to carry the ball. Like, just looking at the stats that Jonathan Taylor had against Illinois, he had 28 carries for 132 yards, 4.7 yards a carry and a touchdown. He had a costly fumble that contributed to Wisconsin's loss. But that's the kind of game plan that they have is, I mean, by and large, we're just going to keep running the ball, and eventually you're going to get tired. So the Ohio State defensive coaches, they know, and the players know that they not only have to figure out what it was that they were doing incorrectly against Northwestern, because Wisconsin's going to try and capitalize on that, but you have to kind of just prepare for the onslaught of just the physical nature of what this game is going to be. I mean, it's just going to be a 4-quarter pound the ball until Jonathan Taylor can potentially break a big play, and I think the Ohio State defense is going to be as well prepared as they possibly can be for that.
Now, I believe before Illinois put 24 points on the Badger defense, that Wisconsin had only allowed 29 all season to that point?
Something like that. Yeah, I know that they had 4 shutouts heading into last weekend.
And granted, you look at Wisconsin's schedule and you think, okay, there's some meatball teams there. There's no question. But that's still impressive. I mean, it's hard to shut a team out. I mean, it's just really, really hard to do. And to be able to do it 4 times, and I think it was something ludicrous, like you have to go back to 67, I think, before somebody had shut somebody out 4 times in the first 6 games or whatever. But it was, you look at that, you don't think I mean, sure, Illinois has improved and they're a decent offensive team, but you don't expect Illinois to dunk 24 points on that defense.
No, I mean, looking at Illinois, as I said, Wisconsin, they turned the ball over a ton. Mm-hmm. We were talking earlier about, Jack Cohn. He had that costly interception that contributed to Illinois being able to eventually, win the game. But what stands out to me was how effective the Illinois rushing game was. Reggie Corbin, he's one of the most underrated backs in the Big Ten. He plays on, let's face it, he plays on a team that is struggling, so a lot of people aren't familiar with him. But he's probably been Illinois' best offensive player this entire season. Mm-hmm. He had a big game, 17 carries for 83 yards. He had a big touchdown. Dre Brown also, he contributed with 11 carries for 70 yards. I think Dre Brown was actually the one who was instrumental in getting the ball. He had a crucial run near the end of the game that allowed Illinois to kick the winning field goal. So as a team, Illinois was able to put 141 yards on a very vaunted Wisconsin defense. So that's encouraging for Ohio State. If they are patient as they have been with the running game themselves, that they can, in a matter of speaking, they can get Wisconsin in the position that Wisconsin often likes to put its opposing teams in. Get them tired out, get them worn down, because I think Illinois has certainly shown that Wisconsin is not completely invulnerable against the run.
Mm-hmm. So, it makes me wonder, how much did Paul Chryst practice for Illinois last week, and how much did he practice for Ohio State?
It certainly begs the question, because, as I said a few moments ago, the Vegas odds makers, I want to say it was around 30. I think they were giving 30 points. I mean, it was a substantial margin. It was the kind of thing where nobody, including Levy Smith, he won't say this unless we give him some sodium pentothal or something. Nobody is going to say, oh yeah, we thought Illinois had a chance. Illinois played well the previous week against Michigan, but let's face it, based on the beating that Wisconsin gave to Michigan, it certainly seemed logical that Wisconsin was going to be certainly capable of handling Illinois, even though the game was on the road. So, it makes you wonder if Paul Chryst, if psychologically, if the players were looking ahead, and if Paul Chryst and his coaches were kind of easily dismissive of the Fighting Illini.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the bad thing is, maybe Wisconsin got all their turnovers out of their system a week early.
We could certainly hope not. One of those, the Jonathan Taylor fumble, that was an example. I mean, this happens. Watching it on the replay, that's an example of the fumble that he had was trying to do a little, trying to gain an extra yard or two. He was already wrapped up
Right.
When the ball was hit out of his arms and before his knee hit the ground, and we already referenced it, but Jack Cohn's interception, that was just a poorly thrown pass, and it was certainly the kind of thing where why Wisconsin was throwing the ball in that situation just makes you wonder kind of what the logic was of the entire situation.
Mm-hmm. All right, Chip, we'll talk a little bit more about Wisconsin in a bit. Let's get around the rest of the Big Ten. The prohibitive Big Ten West favorites now, Minnesota. The Golden Gophers were in Piscataway, where they easily won 42-7 over Rutgers. The big upset here is Rutgers scored a touchdown.
Yeah, but Minnesota, I want to give credit to PJ Fleck. I've often been very dismissive of the rah-rah approach, and as you said, he has Minnesota playing extremely well. And this coming weekend, Minnesota is they're going to be playing host to Maryland, and then they have a week off before they welcome in Penn State. And on November 9th, it is not inconceivable to think that you're going to be seeing two undefeated teams play. I know that November 9th is past that Big Ten night game policy, but I think that's going to be a game that will be that might be your Fox noon game of the week. That entirely possible.
All right, Iowa bounced back with a 26-20 win over Purdue. The the Purdue defense isn't great. The Iowa offense had not been great, but they were able to put it together in this game and get 26 points on the board and win that game. In a game that honestly I forgot it was on. I was going to say that.
Yeah, I don't think you're not the only one. I think Iowa. They were able to win that game, but 12 of those points were from field goals. I mean, they're having a significant challenge with getting into. We referenced it a few weeks ago when they played and lost to Michigan. We talked about it when they lost to Penn State. So I'm sure the people associated with Iowa's football program are happy that they're back on the winning side of the ledger, but they've got to figure out something offensively. They cannot keep having these games where they're getting into scoring position and having to settle for field goals repeatedly.
Well, at 2-2 in the Big Ten, Iowa is quietly sort of circling in the background of that Big Ten West, championship kind of position. They need a lot of things to happen, but I mean, Wisconsin losing to Illinois certainly helps them. And Minnesota has some big games left, and Wisconsin could conceivably lose its second Big Ten game in a row this week. So you can't really count the Hawkeyes out yet, even though that they've kind of been terrible at times this year.
No, I mean Iowa still has to play Wisconsin in a couple weeks. I'm not sure when they have to play Minnesota, but that has to be out there. So, a lot can happen between now and the end of November. That's for sure.
And in the Get Bowl eligible bowl, Indiana beats Maryland on the road to get to 5-2. Chip, Indiana needs one more win.
Yes, and they are at Nebraska this coming weekend, and the way that Nebraska has been struggling now. Granted, Nebraska they were off this past weekend, so who's to say maybe that is all that they needed was a bye week to kind of get ailing players healthy. But yeah, it's within Indiana's sights and grasp to get to that elusive sixth win to make themselves bowl eligible.
And Indiana, the Hoosiers have to be just kicking themselves about giving up that last minute score to Michigan State, and then of course then the on the ensuing drive they did the pitch play and ended up giving a cheap defensive touchdown on the last play. But that was a game that Indiana tied it very late in the game, Chip, and that it could have gone either way. If that had gone into overtime, the Hoosiers could have won that game at East Lansing and already be bowl eligible. So they're going to be kicking themselves over their defensive performance after tying that game. And here's what they got left at Nebraska. You mentioned, and that's a BTN game at 3:30. Then they play home to Northwestern, at Penn State, home to Michigan, at Purdue. Don't book your tickets yet, Hoosier fans. You are not bowl eligible, and that's not a great schedule the rest of the way.
It's not, but we were just talking about the trials and tribulations of Northwestern. So that might be where they get win number 6. And depending on, we haven't talked about that team up north yet. I am not entirely going to eliminate the possibility of what would be the biggest win in Indiana football in over 30 years when they play the Wolverines at the end of November before the game. The way that they're playing with a certain degree of confidence and toughness, and they might just have they've been within striking distance of the Wolverines in recent years. So it's not beyond the realm of possibility, but I agree. I think this Nebraska game is going to be a tough one to call. They might get that 6th win against Northwestern to get themselves to bowl eligible, but I'm sure that they're thinking bigger and better things than just 6 wins in Bloomington.
Mm-hmm. All right, Nebraska and Michigan State were your off teams this week, Chip. And now we can talk about the night game. With this one, we thought was going to be probably a pretty decent game, but I think we expected Penn State to handle this. And as it was 21-7 at the half, it really didn't seem like Michigan was going to be able to get back in this game or really be much of a threat. And it looked like maybe this was the beginning of the end possibly for the Wolverines season and also for Jim Harbaugh. But Michigan fought back in this game. Penn State started to do some dumb things and not be able to move the ball and take sacks and that kind of thing, and give up chunk plays, which was surprising because Michigan's offense hasn't exactly been great, and on the road with Shea Patterson in a very hostile environment, it was you just didn't like Michigan's chances. But in the end, it was really it was all there for them to tie the game and possibly even win it with a 2-point conversion, but a 4th down drop pass late in the game in the end zone.
Yeah, it was kind of like a tale of two halves when you think about it. I mean, it was all Penn State in the first half, and then Michigan, to their credit, they certainly battled back and were. I mean, you just nailed it. The possibility of tying it, possibly even taking the lead on a 2-point conversion, was there. Watching it at home, they certainly had the momentum in the second half. I genuinely feel sorry for Ronnie Bell, and I'm not just saying that as an Ohio State fan. You could see how distraught he was after dropping that pass and on the sidelines, and I immediately think it's like that kid he feels bad enough as it is, and to be subjected to a lot of the social media hatred and insults that he's going through. But he one of the things that he was, even though he dropped that touchdown pass, I mean, without him playing well, he had 4 receptions. He averaged almost 18 yards of reception. So Michigan isn't in that position to possibly tie up the game and possibly win it without the contributions of Ronnie Bell.
And let's be fair, his quarterback didn't give him didn't do him any great favor with that throw.
No. I mean, Shea Patterson, his biggest, in my opinion, he was more dangerous on. They weren't designed quarterback runs, but when he would run the ball, being able to keep drives alive. When he didn't necessarily, he had a touchdown on the ground. He didn't rush for a ton of yards. He only had about 34 yards, but generally speaking, his mobility, against that Penn State defense was what was keeping the Wolverines in the game in the second half.
Yeah, and it was actually kind of funny because I was watching this game at the bar. We were out with friends, and I saw the you know I saw Michigan get back in the game. I kind of couldn't believe what I was seeing, really, when they were moving the ball on Penn State's defense, which had played very, very well this year. I mean, we talk about some of the best defense in the country being played in the Big Ten this season, and you saw Wisconsin's defense kind of get beat up a bit, and you saw Penn State's defense giving up some plays in the second half of this game. But the one that kind of made me chuckle was this. Michigan gets back in the game, and things are looking pretty good. It's 21-14, and then I just don't even know what this coverage was. But KJ Hamler just ran straight down the field. They had one deep safety, one high safety, and he was shaded way over to the right. So it made it so easy for KJ Hamler to just run straight down the field and then slant in toward the goalpost, and all you had to do is put the ball there. Sean Clifford did that 53-yard touchdown pass.
Yeah, KJ Hamler, when we get to that part of the season, he certainly is going to be the target of the Ohio State secondary, simply because, I mean, he's a big threat, big play threat anytime he touches the ball. I mean, he was crucial in Penn State when they were trying to he picked up the crucial first down late in the game that allowed Penn State to run out the clock. Mm-hmm. But you're right. I think there were some major defensive lapses by Michigan. They were able to figure stuff out in the second half, but it was a little too late. They had dug that too big of a hole, the way that they played in the first half, to be able to come back all the way against Penn State on the road.
I'm still not really sure, Chip, how good Penn State's offense is. They only managed 283 points. Now, again, Michigan's got a good defense. We know that. That's one side of the ball that they have pretty much taken care of. But they have these weird lapses. And, again, I just look at that play, and I don't know what defense they were in. If that's a zone, it's a terrible one. And if it's man-to-man, somebody didn't cover KJ Hamler off the line and really forced one man to cover him in a whole lot of space, and that's just not going to work.
Right. I mean, Michigan, they've got their hands full. We talked about this, weeks ago, and I stand by it. It's going to be interesting to see how they respond. I mean, I stand by my comments that they had perhaps some false confidence. Now, granted, their performance in the second half may have warranted their confidence. They did come back. They were very, very close to tying that game, possibly winning it on the road. But they've got another tough opponent coming into Michigan Stadium this weekend with Notre Dame. Now, Notre Dame is not nearly as much of a threat offensively as Penn State was. So I'm not anticipating that necessarily being a high-scoring game. But I do think Notre Dame defensively can shut down whatever Michigan tries to throw at them. So it's going to be interesting to see how and if the Wolverines are able to bounce back from such a disappointing loss.
Mm-hmm. Now the Buckeyes are 7-0 and 4-0, and the Penn State Nittany Lions 7-0, 4-0. Michigan has now 5-2 on the season, 3-2 in the Big Ten, and they are, probably out of the running in the East, unless something really weird starts to happen, being 2 games out. But they do, and they obviously don't have the tiebreaker against Penn State, and they still have to play Ohio State. So I kind of chuckled when Jim Harbaugh said that his I forget how he worded it. He said his offense was on the cusp of breaking out, but not those exact words. He had a way that he said it, but I kind of scoffed at it. But in this game, in the second half, it looked like they did put some things together.
Yeah, they I'm not sure exactly what they've been holding back, but this is the kind of thing where in the preseason, everyone that was predicting the Wolverines to be so much better offensively, you got a glimpse of it Saturday night against Penn State. But it goes back to my question from a moment ago. Where's this been all season? I mean, it's the kind of thing where, all right, yeah, you're rallying on the road against a good opponent in a hostile environment, but this is the kind of thing. If you've had this all season, where was it when you were getting curb stomped by Wisconsin? This is the kind of offensive output that if it's been there, I'm not sure why you've been holding it back.
Well, the one thing that helped them in this game is they only turned the ball over one time, and they've been turning the ball over a lot. Michigan has been turning the ball over a lot, but Penn State, I'm just not sure if this is a good barometer. I don't know how good Penn State is. I mean, they outlasted them. But they went to Iowa. They struggled with Iowa. They beat them 17-12. They kind of didn't. They didn't really have too much trouble with Purdue, but they didn't continue to pile it on either. Maryland, they kicked the crap out of Maryland. Pitt did some really stupid things in the game against Penn State. Pitt could have actually won that game, and that was at Penn State. And then they played Buffalo and Idaho to start the season. So it's really kind of hard to have this game tell you if Michigan's getting better or if maybe Penn State's just starting to play better competition.
Well, we'll see on the Penn State side of the equation this coming weekend, because at 3:30, Penn State's at Michigan State. So now Michigan State had the weekend off, and we all know Michigan State, their struggles that they've had offensively, but we do know that Michigan State defensively has been pretty solid. So we'll see, to your point, if Penn State is starting to regress due to the competition that they're playing. I think after such a tough physical game that game was in Happy Valley, and I think you would remember this as well, that the last 2 years, now granted it was usually after they played Ohio State, Penn State was defeated by Michigan State. It kind of makes you wonder, all right, is that the aftershock of playing an emotional, physical game? We'll see what Penn State, how they respond going on the road to a team that's rested and plays a physical style.
Okay, that's what we're going to find out. I don't know. I mean, but I will say congratulations to Penn State for finally winning a whiteout game.
Well, we're not there yet, but you can mark your calendar next year. You already know who the Penn State whiteout opponent is for 2020.
Yes, we do. All right, so a good trip around the Big Ten. Some weird stuff, some kind of a few things that were expected. And every week is an adventure, and the adventure is still a long way to go before we get done with this season. The Buckeyes will host Wisconsin at noon on Saturday before they'll get the two Eastern Division teams that are at the bottom, Maryland and Rutgers. Hopefully they will not take either of those teams lightly enough to even get in any trouble against those teams. And then the final season gauntlet with Penn State and Michigan back-to-back. So Ohio State has one more in what we called it, in our preseason podcast. This was the first gauntlet: the Nebraska game on the road, Michigan State, Northwestern on the road, and then Wisconsin at home. We thought that this 4-game schedule was going to be brutal, and they beat Nebraska by 41, they beat Michigan State by 24, beat Northwestern by 49. So what's going to happen on Saturday when the Badgers come to town?
This I know it's going to sound like a broken record, and for you kids that don't know what a record is, let's just fill in the blank. Okay, it's something that it's going to sound painfully repetitive, but this is really the test that I think Ohio State fans have been anticipating. Now the upset loss to Illinois kind of made this game lose some of its luster, but to me, this is a huge test. Physical style of play on both sides of the ball. I think Wisconsin, to me it comes down to how well Ohio State can shut down that traditionally strong Wisconsin running game. If Wisconsin is able to, on 1st and 10, if after 1st and 10 and a run by Jonathan Taylor, they're looking at 2nd and 4 consistently, that's a tough spot for that defense. Simply because, with 2nd and 4, that opens it up to running the ball, 2 more plays and or play action passing. So Ohio State on 1st and 10, they have to be able to shut down that Wisconsin running game, try to keep Wisconsin to 2nd and 8, 2nd and 7, which is easier said than done. But to me, it's going to bear watching to see defensively how well Ohio State is able to handle that mammoth offensive line by the Badgers.
Yeah, I mean, in some respects, it's a lot like playing Northwestern. Is that you don't want them to get 4 and 5 yard chunks on first down, because it sets up everything that they like to do. They can still pound the ball 2 more times, or they can use their tight ends. They could do a variety of things. They could do rollout passes. This is what you want to avoid. So Ohio State has to come out strong on first down. They have to read their keys correctly. They have to be sound, and I think they have to play with a lot of emotion. And I'm hoping that the coaching staff will point to that Illinois game and say, look, anything can happen. It doesn't matter how much better you think you are than your opponent. Anybody can beat anybody, and they fell victim to that last week. But they're going to come out even hungrier than ever before. They already were probably overlooking Illinois a little bit, and I wouldn't be surprised if Ohio State did some looking ahead themselves, because this week's Buckeye Weekly post-game show, they talked about Jeff Hafley not wanting to come out and say we looked at Wisconsin film this week. He said he would tell everyone next week. He would answer that question next week. So instead of just saying, "No, we didn't look at any Wisconsin film," he said, "I'll give you the answer to that next week," which is basically him saying, "Of course we looked at Wisconsin film this week."
Yeah, I mean, let's face it. I think we talked ad nauseum about Northwestern's offensive struggles. I think the defensive coaches realized, all right, they're not going to be able to throw the ball on us, and they certainly weren't expecting Northwestern to have the immediate success that they had running the ball. But they quickly rectified that, shut that down. The end result, 52-3. So that kind of, opens up, some time. Like, hey, guys, you want to keep your eyes on Northwestern. Oh, by the way, sneak in some extra film sessions or some film study on what Wisconsin is doing.
Mm-hmm. So Isaiah Bowser, if you're not prepared, will pop a run for 12 yards. Jonathan Taylor, if you're not prepared, will pop a run for 75 yards.
Which is why when you reference the linebacker play, it's going to be crucial that the linebackers are in better position, that they don't over pursue, that they, as I said a moment ago, I think it is so important to win the battle on first down and keep Wisconsin in. I don't want to say, don't be wrong, I'd love it if they were able to hit Jonathan Taylor repeatedly behind the line of scrimmage and put Wisconsin in 2nd and 12, 2nd and 13. I don't see that happening. But if you can keep on 1st and 10 after Jonathan Taylor carries the ball, it's now 2nd and 7. I'm feeling a lot better about Ohio State's ability to make Wisconsin truly one-dimensional, because that's the advantage Ohio State has, is that they are multi-dimensional with the passing game and the running game. With Wisconsin, their passing game is not nearly at the same level as Ohio State's.
Yeah, I mean, they're efficient passing-wise because they have such a strong running game that they can get away with those play-action passes, and teams have to key on Jonathan Taylor so much that it opens things up. Jack Cohn is completing 76% of his passes. He's 9 touchdowns against 2 interceptions. So he's having a Wisconsin quarterback year. He's averaging about just under 200 yards a game. Not asked to do tons of stuff. Not asked to. I mean, they haven't had to rally for anything from behind. They haven't. They've been in control most of the time, so they haven't had to throw the ball. They've just mixed it in, and they do a nice job of doing that and mixing things up. But Ohio State, to be successful, I think, Chip, the big matchup that I'll be watching is whether Davon Hamilton and Jayshon Cornell can keep guys from getting to the second level and blocking the linebackers, because that is really where Wisconsin kills you. If they can get to your linebackers with their offensive linemen and get blocks at the second level, that just opens everything up for them.
Not only that, I think, because let's face it, I mean, like Robert Landers, I mean, his game is kind of that, like shooting the gap and his quickness off the snap. He's not necessarily going to be, to kind of put it in different perspective, he's not going to be, somebody like Big Daddy, back in the day, being able to just completely clog the middle of the interior of the offensive line, and make it difficult. That being said, if Hamilton and Landers and the other interior defensive linemen that are rotated in by the coaching staff, maybe if, as you said, keeping Wisconsin for the offensive linemen from being able to extend the plays to that second level, as you referred to it, if they can force Jonathan Taylor to have to bounce to the outside, that's where I think the superior speed of the Ohio State defense, that's another thing that is in their favor, is that, Jonathan Taylor, I mean, he has, don't be wrong, he has decent speed, but him having to bounce a play to the outside and then getting, one of those linebackers or defensive backs that's there to shut him down, that can become very frustrating for an offense, not being able to capitalize on big plays that they have against their previous opponents.
Yeah, it's going to be a game where you got to be gap sound, and if you do get Taylor going, lateral or parallel with the line of scrimmage, you can't let him have a cutback lane, because again, he can hurt you really on any play, and he can also hurt you in the passing game. He's got 4 touchdown receptions this year. The other guys you got to watch out for in the passing games, junior wide receiver Quintez Cephas, who is, and also Jake Ferguson, the sophomore tight end. Those two are both averaging more than 10 yards per reception, and they have between them the other 5 touchdown receptions that Wisconsin has this year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm concerned about the Wisconsin, their passing game. We were talking about the efficiency of Jack Cohn. I referenced it a few moments ago, but when you look at Wisconsin, again, their receiving is not anything stereotypically that is going to be the kind of thing we're used to, the big plays of Ohio State's wide receivers down the field. What I am concerned about is when Wisconsin is able to, on play action passing, being able to not only get ahead of you in terms of, like, I keep going back to that, like 2nd and 4, because it lends itself to, like you said, like Cephas, he averaged about 12 yards a reception against Illinois, albeit in a losing cause, but I just think that that's the kind of potential for big plays that Wisconsin has, is that we talked about the over aggressiveness of the Ohio State defense. On 2nd and 4, Cohn faking a handoff to Jonathan Taylor and hitting Cephas for a big play. That's what has me really concerned.
Mm-hmm. On the other side of the ball, if Ohio State's going to be successful, they've got to pick up the linebackers. The Wisconsin defensive line doesn't get a lot of sacks, but if you look at their linebackers, Chip, Chris Orr is a senior. He has 8 sacks. Zach Bond, another senior, 6.5 sacks. And Jack Sanborn, 3.5 sacks, sophomore linebacker. That's their top 3 sack getters this year.
Yeah, they're always, when you talk about Wisconsin, that's one thing. They're not overly flashy. Jim Leonard, the defensive coordinator, he usually has these guys, well prepared, well positioned. But the linebackers, like you said, that's kind of an underrated aspect of that unit.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at their defensive line, just the defensive line, you look at Matt Henningsen has 2 sacks, and he's 4th on the team. And then you've got a defensive back, a linebacker, freshman linebacker, a sophomore linebacker, and then a junior defensive lineman with 1 sack. So only defensive linemen are not getting to the quarterback, but the way that that Wisconsin is playing defense is they're sending guys, and you don't know which ones are coming, which ones are not coming, and they confuse you, and they kind of make tackles behind the line of scrimmage, and they get you in long situations, and that's, I think, how they've been able to do so well, in terms of scoring defense this year, is that they keep you off balance, and if you are, get yourself behind the chains, then that's where they really flourish.
So, don't be surprised Wisconsin's spy is Justin Fields, too. I mean, we were just talking about the linebacker core. I would not be surprised if, again, easier said than done, but one of those linebackers, making sure that, Justin Fields, if he does take off, to try to minimize the damage that Justin Fields could possibly do against Wisconsin carrying the ball. So hopefully Justin Fields, discretion is the better part of valor, as they say, that, he doesn't, because it is a physical, hard-hitting team. I obviously recognize the fact that, you want to make a play if possible, and you want to get positive yardage, but making sure that you slide and get out of bounds to avoid any unnecessary hits.
So Ohio State has I think we agree, Ohio State has a pretty good run defense.
Yes.
And they're allowing 92 yards a game. Wisconsin is allowing 58 yards a game on the ground.
But that's where I'd take solace in the performance of Illinois last week. That, we were talking earlier about, well, the Wisconsin offensive coaches, they're going to be poring over that film to figure out what worked against that Ohio State defense. I think the same thing. Ohio State's offensive coaches are figuring out what kind of plays worked against that Wisconsin defense, because we talked about Corbin and Brown of Illinois being able to run for big plays that led to that upset. I think J.K. Dobbins, this is going to be a true test of his patience and perseverance, but I really like that 1-2 punch that Ohio State has with Dobbins and Master Teague being able to eventually break, maybe not necessarily 60, 70 yards, but a big play that will keep drives going and will contribute to Ohio State being able to win this game.
All right, so Wisconsin's number one run defense in the country. Ohio State is ninth. Ohio State, Chip, second in the country pass defense, 136 a game, 136 yards a game. Number one is Wisconsin, 135 yards a game.
It's like I said, this is a kind of game where you're almost, when it comes to the style of play and the results on the field, it's almost like playing against, in certain respects, mirror images. I said a moment ago that Ohio State passing is superior to Wisconsin's passing game, but physical style of play on both sides of the ball for both teams.
So it's the picture of the two Spider-Men pointing at each other.
Maybe not that extreme, but yeah, it's pretty close.
The top two defenses in the country in total defense, Ohio State gives up 229 yards a game. Wisconsin gives up 193 yards a game. It's going to be good. It's going to be interesting. Who's going to be able to pop some plays? Is Wisconsin going to be able to grind out and shorten this game and make it a sort of a 28-21 type game? Is Ohio State going to be able to hit some big plays? Or are they going to be able to protect where other teams haven't been able to protect? I think we're going to see some designed runs this week for Justin Fields, and I wouldn't be surprised if a couple of those don't really do much, but they set up maybe a play like we saw a few weeks ago where it's like, here's the quarterback keeper around the end. Oh no, here they come to tackle him, so he throws the ball to a wide open Ben Victor.
I like it.
Anyway, I need your score prediction for this game, Chip, and your picks to click. We'll do that after the score predictions.
4-quarter game. This is where that broken record sound that I referenced earlier, but I truly think that if this is not a 4-quarter opponent for Ohio State, I don't know who is going to be. But I like Ohio State to pull this out in the fourth quarter. I think it's to be rock'em sock'em type affair, but I like Ohio State 28, Wisconsin 17.
All right, you got 28-17 Buckeyes. Okay, I think Ohio State's offense, I have sold it short too many times, including where I really thought I was being adventurous in saying that they would get 45 at Northwestern, and that wasn't enough. And I also think this week, I don't think the offense is going to do everything. I think that this week is a potential defensive or special team score for the Buckeyes. They've been coming so close to blocking punts. They've blocked several this year. And now you got Jameson Williams out there. He almost came up with 2 of them at Northwestern. I think that he's due. And I'm going to say Buckeyes 35, Badgers 20.
Okay.
I just think that it's going to be hard to shut down Wisconsin. I think it's going to be a very close game until the fourth quarter. I think that Ohio State might be able to get some separation in the fourth quarter, but I definitely think that Wisconsin's going to come to play because they, like I said, their season is basically on the line at this point. They can't take another loss, and they're going to be trying to respond from a really, really embarrassing loss. So you're going to get. Ohio State, you always say they get everybody's best shot. I think Wisconsin may play over their heads this week.
I'm anticipating it. I'd be surprised if we didn't see, just a team that comes out basically playing like their hair's on fire.
Yeah, they may even lead at halftime, or maybe even slow down that second quarter Ohio State burst and then get that belief that they can win when Ohio State doesn't separate themselves. But you're going to be in for a long day, folks. It's going to be. I just don't see this one being an Ohio State romp like we've seen, particularly given There's 2 schools of thought here, Chip. Is that A, Illinois exposed Wisconsin for not being as good as they were, or B, this was an incredible blip and Wisconsin is going to respond, like you said, with their hair's on fire.
I'm inclined to believe it's the latter. I think Wisconsin took their eye off the ball and was sloppy with their ball security, and I think Ohio State's going to get Wisconsin's very best effort.
All right, so let's get on to our picks to click this week, Chip. I believe that I gave you first crack at defense last week, so I'll give you first crack at offense this week.
Well, I'm not gonna be boring and go with J.K. Dobbins. I shouldn't say boring. That's an insult to J.K. Dobbins. I think he's gonna come up big. I think he's gonna have the type of difficult game that he had at the beginning against Michigan State and Northwestern. I'm not sure he's going to necessarily have as big a yardage game, which is why I'm not picking him. But I'm going to go with your guy, Chris Olave. I like Chris Olave to be a difference maker in the receiving side of things. That I think he's going to make some crucial plays in the passing game that is going to help Ohio State eventually break this game open in the fourth quarter.
Okay, I'm going to go with I'm going to sort of stick with the theme from last week. I'm going to say redemption week for KJ Hill. I think KJ Hill had a very quiet week, and I think that the Buckeyes may have been playing a little rope-a-dope. I think that we saw a little bit of vanilla offense at times against Northwestern, and I think we didn't see a lot of targets for KJ Hill, and I think that is... I just think that this is it seems to be a coaching staff that's playing chess while everybody else is playing checkers. So it would not surprise me if this is Ryan Day and his offensive staff saying, we're going to set up Wisconsin by showing this, and next week we're going to do this.
I like it. I think KJ Hill, that's a good. I think KJ Hill is one of those guys that you call it the redemption. I think KJ Hill is going to be one of those guys that, when it comes to like on third down plays, I could see him making a crucial reception that keeps a drive alive. So I like the pick.
Yeah, and I really wouldn't be surprised to see KJ do one of those things this week where, he's drag routing you to death, then all of a sudden he takes up down the field, and they're in the wrong defense to deal with it and hit a big play over the top. Because there haven't been a lot of big plays for KJ this year, but there have been in his career, so we know he's capable of doing it. They just haven't shown him to this point.
I think very, very good point.
All right, so let's go to the defensive side of the ball, Chip. And I know that Baron Browning is returning from injury, and assuming there's no setback this week. So, but it's hard for me to take a guy coming back from injury as the pick to click. Malik Harrison's been a monster all year, so it'd be very easy to pick him. It's just, and I always seem like I'm taking a defensive back too. I think this is the week that Tough Borland makes some crucial plays, and it just seems like a Tough Borland type game. I mean, Wisconsin is a Tough Borland type football team offensively. They do the kinds of things that he's good at stopping. He's good at coming in and gumming up the works. And I think as long as, like I said, Davon Hamilton and Jayshon Cornell, if they can keep him clean, if they can keep that second level clean, I think he can make a bunch of plays in this game. And it may be only like 5 or 6 tackles, but I think they're going to be crucial tackles.
Well, you referenced KJ Hill in the term redemption. I think nothing would be happier for me to see with regards to your pick for Tough Borland to have a game that you're predicting against Wisconsin to kind of get the Buckeye critics off of his back. So I like the logic of the pick. Defensively, I'm going to go with Malik Harrison. I think he's playing some of the best football of his Ohio State career, and I think his sideline to sideline approach is going to be with regards to the defensive line doing their job. I think he's going to be the kind of player that is going to be able to potentially run Jonathan Taylor down from behind when the plays get gummed up. And I think, especially if Wisconsin tries to run to the outside, Malik Harrison will be one of those people putting a hat on his head.
I think we're going to see a lot of – I don't know what you think. I think we're going to see a lot of defensive rotation early in this game to keep guys fresh. I think it's going to be – we're going to see Togiai early. We're going to see, different defensive ends coming in and rotating in. I think that Chase Young will play as many snaps as he can, but because you don't want to take him off the field too often, because any play he can make a difference. But I think we're going to see a lot of changing of defensive linemen. Wisconsin doesn't run a ton of speed or tempo offense. They're interested in grinding out the game and shortening it and holding the ball, keeping it away from you, and grinding you into a fine paste. And that's, with, like you said, with those offensive linemen, with hitting their tight ends and wearing you down over 4 quarters. I mean, but Ohio State's not going to be easy to wear down because they're a very deep team.
No, they're not. And believe it or not, I kind of contemplated Togiai as a sleeper pick for my defensive selection, just based on the fact that he did play against Northwestern. Now, granted, I know he was playing against Northwestern, and I enjoyed how Gerd and Tom Orr said that part of the humor of the evening was hearing the Northwestern play-by-play announcers mispronounce his name every time that he was in the game. But I think you're on to something. Togiai with that defensive line, I think it's going to be crucial that Ohio State, that they Larry Johnson and the coaching staff rotate the defensive linemen, not necessarily play after play, but when they can, when the opportunity presents itself, to keep those defensive linemen as fresh as possible, because it is going to be a 4-quarter affair. It's going to be a physical game that is going to require all of not just the defensive linemen, but even the linebackers. Let's face it. I mean, there's a deep, talented core of linebackers that need to play as much as possible, because this physical style, after a while, I mean, that's kind of what Wisconsin is counting on, is that's how you referenced some big plays that Jonathan Taylor is capable of breaking. It's when he's facing a fatigued defense, and Ohio State fortunately has the depth and talent to supplement their starters enough that hopefully that won't happen.
Yeah, I expect to see, like I said, early on and often throughout the night, I think you're going to see Hamilton, you're going to see Cornell, I think you're going to see Togiai, you're going to see B.B. Landers, you're going to see some Haskell Garrett, maybe some Antoine Jackson. I think they're going to try to rotate a lot of guys and stay fresh, because again, the key to stopping
Wisconsin is keeping your linebackers clean, and if the defensive line is fresh and is able to do that, then those guys can go make plays. The Pete Werners and the Tough Borlands and the Baron Brownings and the Malik Harrisons can go make plays, and obviously I think we're also going to see that on the end of the line as well. You're going to see Chase Young, you're going to see Jonathan Cooper, you're going to see Tyreek Smith, you're going to see Javonte Jean-Baptiste, Zach Harrison. You're going to see the whole 9 yards, but it's going to have to be a team effort. When defensive backs need to make tackles, they're going to have to make them. They're not going to be able to miss them because, again, Taylor's the kind of back that can make you pay if you miss a tackle. I mean, he's not his senior year yet. He's over 5,000 career yards.
Yeah, he's very, very special. I just like the fact that I think Ohio State, if they come into it and they can make Wisconsin truly one-dimensional. I mean, let's face it. Wisconsin, they pride themselves on being able to run the ball. All right, let's completely shut down what you love the most. That's how, a lot of, other programs, regardless of whether we're talking college or pro, that's kind of what they pride themselves on is taking away the thing that you do the best and making you one-dimensional. And I think that's got to be the defensive game plan going into it, is making Wisconsin truly one-dimensional and forcing them to throw the ball, and it just plays into Ohio State's strengths with that ferocious pass rush that the Buckeyes have.
Yeah, I'm looking really forward to seeing what the chess match looks like in terms of Ohio State on defense. Do they put extra guys up around the line of scrimmage? Do they go? Do they have enough faith, and certainly they should, in having guys like Shaun Wade and Jeffrey Okudah and Damon Arnett playing man-to-man, tight man-to-man, and then having Jordan Fuller coming and cleaning stuff up, and just devoting everything else to the run.
Yeah, it's going to be. I would be surprised if the game plan, I keep saying it, has to be shutting down that Wisconsin running game. If you make Jack Cohn, he is the key to your victory, then I think that plays into Ohio State's hands.
Yeah, I mean, force him to have to make plays to beat you on the road, and I think that you're halfway home.
Oh, you're more than halfway.
So, and on the other side of the ball, I mean, really kind of comes down to being sound with the football, because we saw what happened to Wisconsin when they weren't last week, and Ohio State's been pretty good with that this year. They've had some fumbles, but I think that for the most part they've been fairly secure with the ball. So it's gonna be interesting to see if can Ohio State create turnovers and create short fields for themselves, and can they avoid doing it the other direction and giving Wisconsin short fields, because I think that this is one of those types of games where the turnover battle is really magnified.
Yeah, and capitalizing on the field position. We were singing the praises, rightly so, of Drew Chrisman. Here's where when and if Ohio State is in punting situations to make sure that Wisconsin has to go the length of the field. And hopefully Chrisman responds as he has throughout most of his Ohio State career.
Yeah. All right. Wow, we've talked a long time tonight, Chip. It's time to get on out of here. We've done our predicting. We've done our picks to click. Nothing to do now but watch the game this weekend and to come back next week and discuss it. And, of course, then I believe it's a week off before the two Eastern teams, right?
Yeah, that is correct.
All right. So we will have our second showdown with open date after this week. And this is a big one, and if Ohio State can get over this hurdle, you got to feel pretty good about their chances.
Yeah, but we still have a long way to go.
Long way to go. All right, Chip. We'll do it all again next week. Now, if you didn't do it, because nobody did it this week, please, if you want to ask us any question you may have, you can hit us up on Twitter with the hashtag SBPMailbag. And Chip and I will answer your questions on the podcast. You can find me on Twitter at Mike36Fan. And Chip, you are at Chip Minnick, Minnich.
That is correct.
Okay. And where else on the internet can people find you, Chip?
They can find me on the Ozone in the Hayes and Cannon section, as well as on Athlon Sports as a contributor as well.
All right, Hayes and Cannon for me as well over at theozone.net. I am the grumpy old Buckeye, and the next day after the game, usually at noon Eastern, my grumpy old Buckeye column will hit the website, and then you can read about all the things that made me want to walk out onto my lawn in my bathrobe and yell at clouds. And you can also find me if you like music and other things. You can find some of my writing at michaellikestowrite.com, and we appreciate you giving me a shout out over there. Let me know you listen to the podcast. But until next week, Chip, there's nothing left for us to talk about. So let's just end it by saying, "Go Bucks!"
Go Bucks!